So today we've got Richard Foxley with us from HTA. Richard is a senior associate and architect at HTA who has offices in both London and Edinburgh. He's an expert in residential-led development, off-site modular construction, and bespoke build-to-rent schemes. Richard was also on the design advisory panel for the Scottish Government's Housing to 2040 report. So I'll pass over to Richard so he can start his presentation.
Thank you very much. Very nice, kind introduction. It makes me sound more important than I actually am. But it's very nice to be allowed out and get to see some people. So I'll tell you a bit about us. Maybe. Maybe not. There you go. So I thought I'd start off just by telling you a bit about the practice. So we're a large practice, but it's sort of very common that most people probably haven't heard of HTA Design because we just do housing, and it's not necessarily the thing that's kind of in all the glossy magazines all the time. But I want to tell you a bit about the practice because our studio culture is really important to us, and it really affects the way that we approach projects. And I'm sure you've probably heard that from other people before, but I do honestly believe that. This picture is basically all of us from a few years ago, 2018 I think it was, back when we were still allowed to go out and have fun. We used to take the practice away every year for a study trip. So we took everyone to Paris for lunch and had a nice tour around. So this sort of last dot you see here, creative collaboration, that is really sort of at the heart of the way we want to approach our projects, and it's driven around sort of the staff and all the different disciplines we have sort of coming together. The eagle-eyed amongst you might notice this grey-haired chap there, Ben Derbyshire's. He was the past president of the RIBA, just stepped down last year after his tenure finished. So we're kind of well connected. As I was saying, we've got a whole range of disciplines in the practice, and that's kind of not a mistake. We've gone out over the years, so the practice is about 52 years old now, and we've deliberately over that time grown from just being architects into everything you can see there, and that's been quite deliberate because we think that's what it takes to create a great place. And that is how we approach our projects. If you look up placemaking on Wikipedia, you'll see it's attributed to a guy called Bernard Hunt, and he's the H of HTA originally before he retired. So that is sort of in the DNA of the practice, really. And we want to do everything from sort of building the client relationship to designing the project, constructing it, and more now doing the post-occupancy evaluation, getting the feedback and plugging that back into the start of the design process. There's quite a lot of architects out there that just do the pre-planning stages because there's sort of less risk in it, and it's more fun with the felt tips. You get other architects that just do the construction stuff, but I absolutely believe that if you don't know how something's built, you can't really design it properly in the first place. It's very easy to draw those sort of nice overhanging eaves that are sort of super thin, but actually, like, it just doesn't work when you get there. So you're just storing up problems for later. As I say, we're housing specialists, so that's all we do. We just do residential led development, but we do it at all sorts of scales and for all sorts of clients. So basically, anywhere you sleep, if we'll design, unless you happen to be unfortunate enough to be sleeping in a hospital or prison. So just coming back to that sort of culture thing, the middle photograph at the top there, that is our London office, but our London and our Edinburgh offices are all designed around the same principle. So there's a kitchen and a dining space at the centre, and the workspaces are open plan around that. We have a professional chef that comes in every day, so if you work for us, you get a cooked lunch every day. That's absolutely amazing. So you can see some of that stuff there, and everyone just piles into the dining spaces and just sits together. So you can sit next to whoever at any point, and that is one of the things that really brings everyone together because they all sit and chat over lunch. Takes you away from your desk, so it kind of gives you a break, and it kind of promotes a bit of chat. People go out after they've had their lunch, go for a walk, and sort of keep chatting. And that is one of the things that really brings everyone together and helps that creative collaboration that I was talking about, which I'll sort of talk a little bit more about. Also, the top left photo there is every Monday afternoon is basically given over to design critics. So all partners from Ben Derbyshire, who's the chairman, down to sort of the project architects and the project team. They all come together and we'll talk about 3 or 4 projects, and that has really helped the design quality of the office kind of improve, especially over the last sort of 8 years or so. You see a marked difference in that. And that culture thing, so we turned 50 a couple of years ago, and the big thing for lots of people to do is sort of bring out a book about you know, all your work, stuff like that. So we thought we'd do something else instead. So we wrote out a cookbook that is basically all our favourite recipes. There's a couple of pictures of some of the buildings we've done in there, but it's basically sort of trying to reflect our culture and like what's important to us and what is that makes the practice. And we do a lot of other things socially to help bring people together, but one of the important things I want to talk about is Sketch Club. So the last sort of Thursday of every month, we go out somewhere locally, take a crowd along, and we'll sketch something. And it is really interesting. You know, apart from the fact you always end up in the pub talking about it, it's really interesting just to see what it is that different people draw. You know, some people try and draw the whole thing, like you see there. Some people just draw a tiny detail. Some people are in between, and then chat about it. So I like to see how people see things and think about things. For me, though, it's sort of really important because it's about communication, and design and architecture is really all about communication. It's about communicating an idea, whether it's right at the start or whether you're going into construction. You've still got to communicate how you want to build the building, and the ability to be able to do a sketch is just kind of apparent and nothing. You like all over lockdown, try to talk to people over Zoom calls and things like that, and explain to them like, no, if you just move this here and do that there, you know, it just doesn't work. Whereas if you've got a pen and piece of paper and you can just sketch something out, and if you can do a convincing sketch, you know, it's worth 1,000 words. So that is sort of something that's really important to us. So I'll stop banging on about the practice because it sounds like I'm trying to sell you the practice, which I'm not. But as I say, it's just a bit about kind of how we approach projects, and it is about getting the team together and trying to create a great place. So the first couple of projects I want to show you aren't necessarily things that you would initially sort of think of as architecture projects in the sort of traditional sense. So Cater Park, we've got a big client, Barclay Homes, who provide a lot of sort of high quality housing in the southwest. Work with them quite a lot, and the more savvy developers are sort of finally twigging that the thing that we've been sort of banging on about for a long time, that the ground plane and what you do around the buildings in the public realm, that is what actually makes a place. So, you know, the buildings, they're all well and good, but actually, you know, it's what's happening around the buildings where people are coming and going, where they're meeting and they're kind of going about their daily life. That's what actually makes a place. So we've been working on a place called Kidbrook Village, which is all the housing you can see behind, but it's part of a 30-hectare estate. So we were talking to the client about kind of what else they can do to kind of make this a better place and not just sort of do the usual thing about stick up some housing, make a payment to the council, they'll deal with sort of the green space elsewhere, and put in, you know, kind of a bit of play space. We thought, well, what if you actually went for it? What if you did something and really made this a place that was more than just for the people that lived there, but was attracting the wider community? And to their credit, they bought into it, and they said, right, go off and tell us what you think you can do. So we hooked up with the London Wildlife Trust and started to convince them that they should do this sort of mosaic of landscape around the buildings. That basically the goal was to create a biodiversity net gain. So by the time we were finished building, the whole place would be in a better state than we'd found it from an ecological point of view. So we spent a long time looking at the flora and the fauna and seeing what else we could do to improve the place. A lot of community consultation, see what the families wanted, what they needed, and looking at the sort of attractions around the estate and how we could sort of weave all these together. So it's still under construction, but a lot of it is already built. And you can see that we're basically, you know, creating this, as I say, mosaic of landscapes that join the buildings, but also give space to do pretty much anything and everything you want to do. It attracts people from all around the community and gives them space to play, to hang out. The major spaces within the community are given a yearly programme, so there's different things planned in for different times of the year that all sort of coincide with what's happening in nature, and makes it just a fantastic place to live. Our graphics team kind of teamed up and did all the wayfinding for the whole estate. So we just, tried to make this fantastic place. When you see shots like that, you can think, well, you wouldn't want to live in a place like that, and the sort of architecture can just sit kind of quietly in the background. So that was one thing that we did. One of the other ones that I want to talk about is this project, Assemble and Join. So there's a street called Lower Marsh at the back of Waterloo Station that a few years ago, it's sort of quite typical of a back street around the back of a station. It's kind of got some market stalls, and it's got lots of small shops on it, kind of not really well maintained over the years, so it's kind of looking a bit grubby. So the council had a competition to say, right, we've got a little budget, what can we do to improve the streets? And there's tons of entries into it, and most of them from architects and landscape architects, like sort of basically the traditional thing where they're like, we'll take your budget, we'll rip up the paving, we'll put down some sandstone, put down some granite curbs, all that sort of stuff, and just try to improve the fabric. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all, but they've typically got a small budget, and the budgets don't go that far, and it doesn't really kind of allow for ongoing maintenance, which is always the problem. That's why they had that competition in the first place, because there's no ongoing maintenance. So we had a think about it, and it was actually one of our graphics team that came up with the idea that we sort of thought, well, what if we took your budget, and what we'll do is we'll rent one of the empty shops on the street, so immediately we're kind of improving the street, and we'll do what we came to call community micro manufacturing. So we bought a CNC machine and bought loads of plywood, and basically opened the shop and said to the local community, you can come in and we'll help you design and make anything you want, but the only stipulation is it's got to help the street. So there's shop fronts, you can make planters, there's stools, all sorts of things. We got to know the community because they were coming in telling us about their shop or where they lived, or the kind of their life around the area, and we were starting to do things that improved the street. So over the course of, I think it was like 6 or 8 months we were there, we ran 300 workshops, so about 1,000 people coming in through the doors. Tried to get as many kids in as possible to kind of keep them engaged in the street. And as soon as people take that bit of personal investment in making something that they put outside, then they're invested in the maintenance and they'll keep all of that. So we used it as a sort of community consultation thing. People building birdhouses, planters, sort of signs for the market. There's little bug hotels, things like that. And it made such a big difference to the street that we realised that it's actually a really good community consultation tool. So it has now become a company in its own right that we use to do community consultations on some of the big estate regeneration projects that we do, because it's a way of actually getting people involved. They'll talk to you much more if they're kind of involved in designing something and working with you, rather than you just going along and doing the sort of traditional, here's what we're going to do to your estate sort of thing. So again, just one of the things that when you think about a place and how you interact with it and how you can make changes without necessarily ripping up the fabric. These are the things that are important to us in terms of placemaking. So some of the more traditional stuff that we've done. Castleward and Derby, this is a competition that we won in 2012, I think it was. And Derby's a really interesting place because it's outside of London. It's got the highest pay per head in the UK, but it's got some of the worst housing there because there's loads of big business there, so Rolls-Royce, Toyota, Bombardier, lots of sort of highly qualified jobs are in Derby. But because there's traditionally not been much good housing there, people work there, take the money, and they go live in Nottingham, where it's much nicer and it's just next door. And this site came up, and the council had been struggling with it for 10 years. So just to the sort of top left is Derby City Centre. The bus station is there, the market is there. At the top of the picture, you see what's called the Bass Wreck, so there's canal runs through it, loads of open space. The main northeast train line comes through, so just on the right-hand side of the site, you can see that's traditionally over the years been one of the main hubs for the Northeast Railway line. The green space down the bottom of the picture there is the Botanic Gardens. So all around that site is loads of stuff going on, but they had the problem that the train station and the city centre were basically disconnected, because all that stuff within the red line there was just light industrial uses that were kind of not planned, and had just basically grown piecemeal over the years. And it was a horrible place to be. It didn't have street lighting, so after dark nobody walked down it. Kind of the drunks hung out there, and basically people didn't want to be around there. So there was a big sort of gaping hole in the middle that meant people couldn't get to the train station, or if they're in the train station, they didn't know how to get to the city centre. They were cut off from the green space. So there was competition that we entered. But basically, the idea was to basically make this big green boulevard that joined the bus station and the city centre at the bottom, all the way to the train station at the top. And there's a wee conservation area. And that was the basics of it. Just one big move that sort of reconnected the two spaces, and then just through simple housing around about it, connected into all these other things. So connected up to the Bass Wreck at the north, it connected to the Botanic Gardens to the south. There's a school there, and we put a square at the middle of that boulevard that just looked onto it. So all the community functions are held around the middle of that. And it's quite difficult because you don't really have an existing community there to sort of ask, what they want, what they need. But the council had spent basically 10 years doing compulsory purchase orders of lots of the different bits of the site, which was what enabled us to be able to master plan the whole area and we want to do it. So the first phase that we built out was basically that main boulevard and the sort of narrow band of housing and the community square at the centre. And again, it was all about sort of trying to make the place and make nice streets that people would kind of be happy walking down, whether it was day or night. We bring some activity to the street. So we designed these maisonettes that have retail at the bottom and then living space above. We joined up with a local artist. So this bottom right photo there is a local sculptor who, his idea was basically, because we were talking about welcoming people back into the city centre again, he wanted to make chairs so that you could come in and you could sit on the chairs. There's also a big manufacturing history in Derby, so he went around and he made all these things. I think they had loads of silk mills and things like that. So he got these tools that were traditional to the area from the works that they'd done, and they appeared on these chairs, which were various scales and heights. And the backdrop to that was basically some really simple architecture. So the client was a joint venture between a local housing association and a volume house builder. And there was a huge requirement for affordable housing as part of the scheme. So, there's not a great deal of money in affordable housing. So you've got to be sort of quite clever about how you use it. So we tried to make sort of slightly more spacious homes for people, but they're just really simple brick and just very small brick bits of detailing here and there. But basically just made them the sort of backdrop to a really interesting space and some really nice green streets. And it was really popular. People kind of flooded back to the area, and it's made that connection between the city centre and the train station, which was the sort of the main point of it. So really successful project for us. So the phase 2's just been built, and phase 3 is kind of just about to get underway on that now. And as I say, that is it. It's just about creating streets, creating places that people want to be and are happy to be. And one of the big ideas for the general master plan was to reduce the amount of parking to an absolute minimum, because you've got the bus station on one side of the site, you've got the train station on the other side, you've got the bus wreck up to the top, and you can walk pretty much anywhere in sort of 10 minutes. So we did a lot of work on that with the council, reducing the parking down. So the master plan was the first development in the country to get BREEAM communities certification. So BREEAM is a sustainability certification usually for buildings, but they brought out a certification for community master plans. So this was the first one in the country to get it, just based on a lot of the work that we've done around the place rather than the buildings. So one of the things that we're kind of well known for is large scale estate regenerations. They're sort of very difficult things to do and politically sort of very sensitive things to do. You don't have to go too far back in history to see examples of where it was done really badly and people were just kind of basically moved out and the areas were gentrified. And it's still, it's still burdened with a lot of that. But we don't really do it that way anymore. One of the big estates that we're currently working on is Winstanley estate here. So it's 2,250-ish homes, so it's a fairly big estate. And again, it's all about kind of how you make the place that the people who've lived there, grown up there, and spend their life there, how you keep it a place that they want to be. What you find is with a lot of these places, a lot of the people that live there are going to spend their whole life in the council housing system. So they've been born in it, their parents have been in it and they're going to be in it through their life. So these estates are actually really important. So part of the problem that they had previously was they would come along and say, right, well, we'll take you and we'll just stick you in housing over here, which is nice and new, so you'll enjoy that, and then we'll just kind of demolish this and get on with the rest of it. But what the failure there was that people didn't understand that their whole life was in that estate. So their whole support network, their family, their friends, one of their probably many part-time jobs was somewhere around that estate. And as soon as you take them and just stick them over there, they've lost all that because you probably took the other half of their support system and put it over there. So it's really important to understand kind of these people's lives, how they operate and what their support systems are, and to kind of keep that in place whilst you're doing it. So the master plan stems from this big building at the front here, around all the CGI bits you can see in this. So there's about 12 or 13 blocks in there. That is a mixture of affordable, private and rental accommodation. So as I was saying, the community is the sort of the focus for us in that. So what we did for the community consultation part of this was we went and chatted to them and asked them about the things that are important to them. And unsurprisingly, it was sort of the usual things. We were talking about the train station, which is at the bottom of that master plan picture. At the top left there, they wanted open space so that they could sort of play and be together. They wanted to make sure they weren't going to lose the local pub. They wanted some more kind of new spaces that they could call community spaces. So we listened to them. We have an illustrator that's part of our graphics team. So they came along and we basically started drawing up just really loose images to start with about the kind of things they were talking about. And if that was when you went back with it, is that the right thing? Is that what you had in mind? And also just on the left there, we worked with the local community school to look at the graphics for branding the estate and the regeneration. So they were all involved in that. So the kids love seeing kind of their work kind of going up around the site and they stay invested in it. So then once we sort of had a broad agreement on the things that they were interested in, we set about making a master plan that basically reflected all those things. So there's a big green space at the centre that's got plenty of outdoor play space. It's got plenty of overlooking, it's got a leisure centre, it's got connections to the train station. It makes sure that the pub is front and centre on the main corner. All these mansion blocks are sort of designed so that they have private internal courtyards for the people that are in those blocks. So there's layers of space and public realm that you can either be out front, in front of everyone, overlooked, or you can be slightly more private in your back garden, essentially. And basically started responding to everything that they'd asked us to do. We've just finished building that tower that I pointed out, which was a really complicated project because it sits right basically on top of the tube line. So it's pretty difficult engineering to that, but it's a start. So the next block that we're about to start on site is this guy here. but it's a really emotive thing. So Extinction Rebellion moved into the site 6 months ago. And they heard that there was a couple of trees going to get cut down, so they took residence in the trees. Bob Geldof came along, gave them a bit of a cheer, and they've now moved into there's a church just on the outskirts of the site. So there's still lots of interest in it, and it still really stirs up a lot of feelings for people. But we're doing our best to kind of make sure that everyone is taken along for the journey. And generally the residents are pretty happy with what we're doing, the council's pretty happy with what we're doing, and so far it's all going pretty well. So one of the other things that we're quite well known for now is I think called build to rent. So it's a relatively new tenure in this country, but it's pretty common around the rest of Europe, where you have developers that come along and they build sort of pretty big buildings, the kind of thing you see there, but they don't sell it off, so you can't buy any of the apartments. They just own and operate that as a rental business. So all the apartments in there are owned by them, rented out by them, and they are in charge of like the whole area basically. So it was a big American client that came to us, and at first they had this north part of the site, which is just to the north of the canal there, and it had an existing planning permission for about 600 homes. But build to rent, basically, it works at scale. So it's all about kind of managing a lot of apartments to make the income. And they came to us and were asking about how we make a place out of this. That north part of the site was the previous headquarters of GlaxoSmithKline. So there's a tiny wee hut that you can just barely see on the top right that used to be the gatehouse for the facility, that is going to have to stay there forever, because what they realised after they sold the site, which was a bit of a climber, that all their worldwide patents were registered to that address. And if you're GlaxoSmithKline, that is a lot. So rather than try and spend all the money reversing all them and doing whatever you need to do, they just agreed that they would keep that gatehouse, and that would be their post box. And then this bit down the bottom, south of the canal there, was an old Hovis factory, but they'd all been sort of boarded up and shut up for about 10 years, and the whole site was just kind of shut off to everyone. It used to be, there's a big green space just to the right hand side of the plan there, and it used to be for the local community, they would be able to get through the site, walk the dog, get to the hill and the outskirts, but they haven't been able to do that for a long time. So it was a bit of a sort of dead spot within Ealing. So they came to us and we talked to them and convinced them that actually they should buy this bottom part of the site as well. So then you bring that canal into the site, and that makes a massive difference to the place and what you can do. So it was an interesting process to go through it, because the build to rent guys, like, their business is renting you an apartment, so they want a nice apartment for you to live in. So they are interested in an apartment in a way that your private developers are never going to be interested, because they're going to build that, they're going to sell it and walk away, and they don't care. Whereas these guys, they've got to rent it again and again and again, and they've got to make sure that you have a great experience. So they are really interested in it, and it was fantastic working through the design of that, because they basically came and wanted to go back to scratch and said, right, what does a person actually want from an apartment, especially if they're a renter, or if they're going to, how do you live in the apartment if you're sharing with someone rather than just living in it on your own? How can they adapt? And they were really kind of into all the services and everything about the apartment. That was just in so much detail, but it was a really refreshing thing to do. So we developed a suite of apartment types, basically, that all these E-shaped blocks you can see across the plan, they're all the private rent blocks. The other two at the bottom here are private sale that were kind of sold on to other developers to build them out. But we worked with our own landscape team, our graphics team, our interiors team, our planning team, and we also worked with 3 other architects to kind of develop all this over a kind of 18-month period of time, which is really quick. When this plan application went in, it was the biggest plan application in London. And to do that in the course of 18 months is sort of pretty bonkers, but they're big American guys, like straight out of the movies, and they just wanted it done. So we got it done. and it's fantastic sort of result. So we basically designed the inside of all these E-shaped blocks, and then worked with other architects to kind of wrap them and sort of bring some interesting ideas to the interiors. But the general concept was, as I say, kind of what happens at ground floor. We managed to, because it's quite a repetitious floor plate above, from first floor up, we could basically design that sort of relatively quickly. But from the ground to the first floor, that took most of the time because there's so much going on. But our basic concept was bring the canal back in, make a big amphitheatre and big public space at the centre that everything is focused on, and it'll be a great place. So that's kind of what we've done. So the first block that was built was finished just at the end of 2019 there. It just sits right on the corner of the canal, looks out sort of towards the centre of London, has this fantastic landscape space. There's a huge energy centre that serves the whole development. Basically underneath all those trees, you can see in the picture, there's a huge bunker that's like a sort of James Bond villain's lair. It's absolutely huge, just under there, all the kit that they need to run all the blocks on the site. Again, architecture is sort of relatively simple, and it's the details of the landscape that kind of make the place and help make the community. The management of the buildings, they also manage the public realm, so they can keep that as a sort of really crisp, highly maintained environment. But within the buildings, the concept is that you kind of sleep in your apartment, but you live in the building. So you have access to the entire building. So at the top floor, you can see on that image there, typically in a private sale development, that would be this penthouse apartments that are all kind of big and swanky. But in this model, there is no sort of penthouse. No one's better than anyone else. All the apartments are basically the same. So that is given over to all the residents. So that's all amenity space. So there's things like a private dining kitchen. So, maybe you've got a one-bed flat, but you want to get 10 of your mates over for dinner. You can basically book yourself the private kitchen and dining room on the top floor and just have that for a party. There's a lounge, there's a gym, there's a cinema room, games hall, all sorts of stuff. And it all sits overlooking this amphitheatre. And over the course of lockdown, what we found was that these buildings basically offered something that a typical private sale apartment can't, because all these people are suddenly working from home, in one-bed, two-bedroom apartments don't have spare space. Instead of having to sit on the end of their bed or on their kitchen bunker, they could basically go upstairs, go to the club room, go to the lounge. They could go and sit outside. All the blocks have big external podium gardens, which have little kind of greenhouse spaces in them. So there's all sorts of places you could go and just get a bit of privacy, and there's free Wi-Fi all over, so you could work wherever, and it's just like being in an office. Again, we worked with our landscape team and our graphics team to kind of make sure that it was consistency throughout everything from the branding of the building, the wayfinding for the site, and all the little details that went into the landscape. If you live in the building, this is your front door. You come in, there's a concierge desk on the left-hand side, so there's 24/7 concierge. If your washing machine breaks in the morning, they'll have it fixed by the time you get back. There's post boxes, mail storage, all that sort of stuff. So it really is, it does give you the opportunity to live in a style that you'd probably never be able to afford if you were going to buy. So this is one of the outdoor courtyards I was talking about on the left-hand side, games room on the right-hand side that you basically come and go as you please. So one of the interesting things about that whole development is it's all built from off-site manufactured, fully volumetric modules. So these things here that you see, they're built in a factory in Bedford. The windows are in, the kitchens are in, the bathrooms are in, the carpets rolled up, ready to get put down. If you want pictures on the wall, we'll stick them on the wall for you. So basically everything in that module is finished. It's wind and watertight. So they just bring it in, drop it on top of the next one, a bit like Lego, weld it together, plug it in, do the plumbing, and it's off and goes. So it's a super quick way to build, and really high quality. There are loads of off-site manufacturer benefits. that people always talk about, because it's done in a factory, so it's the same people doing the same thing again and again, so they get really good at doing that, and they're not trying to do it in like -3 degrees and the wind and the rain and trying to, you know, cut a bit of 2x4 or something like that. You know, they've got a proper bit of space in the factory to do it, and because it's sort of designed properly in the factory, they can optimize all the layouts of the runs of the services and things like that. So there's loads of stuff that you can read about how good it is, but we were interested from our own point of view to see, is it actually that good? Because there's a thing in traditional construction called the performance gap, where we do all these drawings and make all these calculations that say, oh, well, this will give you, you know, so much thermal value, and, you know, there'll be 0 air infiltration or whatever. But then you're relying on some guy, as I say, like working in the wind and the rain, just come along, hammering something together, and actually, you know, it doesn't take much for them not to achieve that junction the way that it's actually drawn. So then the building doesn't perform in the way that it was calculated. And it's quite widely known problem, but there's not really much they can do about it in traditional construction. But there's the potential to do a lot about it in offsite, because you do it in the factory. So with that, the client and that building that we're just looking at, we're lucky because they are, as I say, they operate the building for, you know, 15, 20 years before they might think about selling it on, and the maintenance and the running costs and the build costs, you know, it's all hugely important to them. They're generally all funded by pension funds, so like, you know, they all want to know everything about the building. So they had deep pockets, they were really interested in it, so we managed to convince them to let us basically redraw the entire building, remodel it again, but as a traditional concrete frame building. And it's not a cheap thing to do, so kind of, you know, nobody really suggests that because you get laughed out of the room. But in this case, they were really interested in it. So we basically had the same building modelled identically with different construction types. And we teamed up with Herrick Watt, and they did a full life cycle analysis of it, and basically came back and said, right, here you go, here's the savings in embodied CO2. So I don't know what 810 million balloons actually look like, but, you know, it gives you an idea of kind of the volume of CO2 you can remove. And given the climate challenge that is out there, and net zero being everyone's target, you know, it's quite a startling thing to see. So we've done a lot of work with Offsite. It's one of the things that we're known for now. We've got a lot of expertise in it. I sound again like I'm trying to sell you Offsite. I'm not, but it's just one of the things that we're very interested in. But the standardization thing is a really interesting argument, because there's, as designers, as soon as you say standardization, there's always a few people that are like, I don't know about that. You know, but actually, for us, I think if you standardize all the sort of, you know, just the back of house stuff, the cupboards and services and things like that, and then you customize the things that actually make a difference to the place, then, you know, you can still come out with a really good product. So we did just, because as I was saying, we've done a lot of these offsite projects. We did a lot of study lately about just some of the shapes of all the modules we've used. As you can see, some of them, well, very few of them are actually square or rectangular. So they can achieve lots of really interesting things, and the buildings don't have to look like, you know, modular buildings. So these are some of the buildings that we've done, which I would argue that they don't look like modular buildings. Some people would, but there's two ends to that spectrum. So at one end, we're working with Ilke Homes. So what they're doing is they're coming up with a product, basically. So they're basically going to sell the same house type everywhere they go. And we're doing a bit of work with them at the moment to design those house types, but also to show how that the same skeleton could give you quite different looks depending on the context and where you want to build them. So that's kind of one end of it, which is very interesting. But the other end, which we do more of, is the full volumetric stuff. So this is the world's tallest offsite manufactured tower in Croydon. It's 38 and 44-storey towers that are clad in green terracotta. The whole thing is another build to rent project. So again, up the top, you can see there's a big sky garden up there. But again, for us, it's about, you know, that is a very specific building, but we're interested in what it can do for the place. So we're really interested in how this could be an asset for Croydon beyond just being more rental apartments. So the ground floor is a big 2-story canopy that is partly there for wind protection, because if you've ever stood at the bottom of a 44-story tower, but the wind comes shuttling down that and makes it a pretty breezy place to be. So we put a big canopy over that, and made a colonnade that is sort of going to join on to the next development along that is the introduction to the new cultural quarter in the area. So it begins to root the building into the area. As I say, built entirely from modules, so it was absolutely bonkers on site. It took them about a year just to get out of the ground with some of the biggest reinforcement I've ever seen in my life, because they had to build such a big basement, basically to get parking services and things like that, because it's a very tight footprint. But then they shoot up really quick, so they slip form the cores. So these, on the left-hand side there, the little boxes you see on the top of the cores, is basically a formwork that they are always pouring concrete into, and it just moves up, a couple of millimeters a minute. So over the course of a day, it goes up about 3 meters, and it basically just takes long enough for the concrete to start to set. So they basically got up through 44 stories in about 44 days. So the core goes up really quickly. They come along, they bash in all the modules, and before the modules even got to the top, they come along with mast climbers and they start putting the facade on, which is basically just a rain screen cladding. So you can see just the timeline there, how quick this stuff is. And it's fascinating to watch. Being architects, we enjoyed some of the details. So we spent literally, I think, about 8 months picking that colour of green for those terracotta tiles, because it's just that important. But it's fantastic. There's big sort of full story height terracotta panels. All the angles kind of catch the daylight in different ways at different times. And for the opening of the building, for a month, they did a light show that was projected onto the face of the building, and some very clever people had worked out kind of all the panels, and if you shone light from different angles, it would make different pictures and things like that. So that was great, but I think it annoyed the first few people that moved in, because that was going on every night for a month. But as I say, build to rent, it's the sort of same thing as before. There's all sorts of amenities in there. So there's a big winter garden at the top. There's another kitchen and lounge there. It's got its own dog wash. So this is one of the things that we get from the post-occupancy feedback. If you've got a happy dog, then you're a happy owner. And if you're a happy owner, you're more likely to stay. So they spend loads of money making things like dog washes. Lots of rental places won't even entertain a dog. So this building is currently, I think, 78% occupied, and 65% of the people in there have at least one dog, if not more. And they all come in, give them a wash and a shine, and keep them happy. So it's a lot of details like that that kind of help set these things apart. And again, we worked with our interior designers and our graphics team to make sure that things like the branding was tied in with the interior design, and it's a holistic look at the whole building. So the client was a repeat client that we've worked with quite a few times, and it's a bit of an icon down in Croydon now. So they were absolutely delighted with it until we did this. So they had the tallest building, off-site manufactured tower in the world, and we've just got planning for this right next to it. So they're less happy about that. But this is sort of part of the story of making the place. So this building is the first and possibly going to be the last fully co-living building that the Greater London Authority have approved for construction. So like many things, people kind of cotton onto the idea. So co-living is one of the sort of relatively new tenures where you get much smaller bedrooms. There'll be 6, 8 or 10 bedrooms in an apartment, and there'll be a shared living room, a shared kitchen. And then those apartments will be within a slightly bigger apartment that has some more amenities. And then there's like whole floors of amenity given over to the residents. So it's a cheap way to basically be able to live in the city. But the less scrupulous developers can always get a hold of things like that and just try and sort of slam in loads of low cost and very small housing. So there's a bit of a reaction about kind of entire buildings being given over to co-living now, and most buildings, they're trying to kind of get a mixture of tenures in there. But the taller element on the left there, that is going to be entirely co-living, and the element on the right hand side that's slightly shorter is going to be affordable housing. So the two of them together, the colonnade at the bottom of that is going to continue, and it's going to join on to the Fairfield Halls here, which is a sort of local hotspot with a bit of a marketing thing in it. So that is, we're just doing sample panels and stuff on site about the facade. That is again more terracotta cladding, and they're doing a sample of how we do that big crown at the top at the moment. So it's quite exciting. That will start properly on site in the next few months. And then one of the things that we did sort of very recently, just through lockdown, which was kind of a fascinating thing to be part of, was something that we ended up calling the industry prints. So when everything went into lockdown in March 2020, one of the busiest working members of our studio are the 3D printers. And basically going all the time, work harder than anyone else and get paid less than anyone else. But they're all just basically sitting there, and a few of us took them home. And a lot of people at the time were talking about there's obviously a big PPE shortage and things you could do to help. So we had the idea that maybe you could 3D print the sort of the visor that staff would need. And then we started talking to some of the other practices that we work with quite a lot, and they also have 3D printers and also thought that'd be quite a good idea. So through that collaboration with them, we got to know some other people, and I ended up being on the working group for the NHS's PPE delivery, and basically got a front row seat to the problems they were having in getting any PPE. So the contractors that we work with, a lot of them had basically, as soon as lockdown came along and the sites got shut down, they just gave them all the PPE they had. But it's kind of paltry amounts when you think of the amount that the NHS needed. So what we did was we went around basically all the practices we knew, and this is where Ben Derbyshire, being the president of RIB, came handy. Spoke to RIB, and basically we set up, we got the first design, which is the top left there, and then we set up a single page website that had the 3D printing file and the instructions for how to do it and what to do afterwards. So anyone could go along and download that, put your email address on the database so that if and when we updated the model, as you can see, we went through a few iterations, you would get the latest one and you could just print that. And through that working group, we teamed up with logistics experts and people like DHL who came along and said, you know, we'll start delivering stuff. Rolls-Royce started saying, we'll cut the plastic for the front of them. So what we did was we were giving these visors to NHS staff. There were doctors on the working group who came back literally the next day and said, no, that doesn't work, or, you know, that does work, or, you know, you need to change this. So we're quite quickly able to iterate different options. So this one on the top right was the one that we printed for most of the time, where basically those the little logs that you can see at the front. We ended up figuring out that if you put them in the right place, you can just use a 4-hole A4 punch to punch the plastic that would then just clip on, and then you could rip that off and reuse another one. And then we started looking at how you could print them more efficiently, and all this time, more and more people were getting involved in it. So by the sort of the peak of it, we had just over 80 other architecture and engineering practices also printing. So we're printing literally thousands a day. They would go to a central facility in Manchester where somebody else would deal with getting the actual sort of visor protection piece, putting it in a bag, sending it into the NHS distribution stream, and then the NHS would decide where the best place and the most needed place was at the time. And we did that for months until basically October that year, where the government changed the legislation in, I think, a bit of a political move, but I basically said anything that was donated had to be CE marked. which means go through loads of legal testing and things like that, which you can do because all the labs were shut. So we basically had to sort of wrap that up as a project, and people still kept printing them and basically offering them to the local authorities who could take them at their own risk. But it, basically put the kibosh on the project as a whole. But it was a really interesting thing to be part of, just kind of seeing day to day kind of how things were developing and how we as architects could still help in different situations. And just seeing the goodwill that came out of all these other practices that just kind of jumped up and said, yeah, let's do that. So the collaboration there was the key thing to making that work. We couldn't have done that, but just as a single practice, we didn't have the expertise to do everything. But as everyone came together, it made a big difference. So just in closing, I thought consider what's next in sort of architecture industry. So from our point of view in housing especially, I suppose for you guys thinking about how you get a job in the future, understanding the challenges faced by the industry, the discipline you're going to go into. So you might not do housing, but every different part of the construction sector has slightly different challenges, but they're relatively common. The climate change and the race to net zero is sort of the big thing that's coming for everyone. There's changes to the regulations coming that are going to make energy efficiency much more important. Going to put massive implications on sort of thermal values and the renewable energies that you can use. For us, the placemaking in the community is still something that we're going to keep pushing all the time, but biodiversity is going to be a big part of that for us. Within the industry, as I say, regulation is they're all changing. For us, the post-occupancy evaluation of these big schemes that we're doing, we're really interested in getting more into that, learning more about how these buildings, how these places are operating, how the people are occupying them, what they do differently. Version 2 is basically always better than version 1 by quite a long way, because version 1 is always a bit of a guess, really. One of the things that we're working on is home performance labelling. So it's a sort of pilot scheme that we've been trying to get the government to look at with varying amounts of success. So there's a funny thing at the moment that the biggest thing that you'll probably ever buy in your life is a house. But you literally know more about your cornflakes that you eat in the morning than you do about your house. So the people who make cereal, they have to put all the ingredients and everything on the back of the packet. You buy a house, if you're lucky, somebody gives you an energy certificate that says, oh, it's rated B. Brilliant. What's that mean? And actually, there's that in itself isn't the big thing that a lot of people are interested in. They want to know what the Wi-Fi and the mobile signal is like. They want to know what, if you give them some information on the area of the rooms, the things like your volume house builders, they basically build to the lowest common denominator, because that is the best they can do. It's what they've always done, and it's what they know how to do, and they know how much it costs. But it's not necessarily the best thing for most people. Most people just don't know any better because they've never seen any better. If you start sort of lining things up and comparing them in a sort of Zoopla sort of fashion, like, well, that one's got 2 square meters more per bedroom than that one, these things can start swaying people's opinion and whether they want to buy or rent an apartment. So that's a big thing that we're working on at the moment. And housing in general, I think there's sort of loads of new investment models coming into the market, like pension funds and things like that are coming along. So there's obviously a housing crisis that everyone knows about. So the days of sort of building 20 houses in a cul-de-sac, are kind of drying up. It doesn't really sort of solve anyone's problems. All the councils have got to build thousands of houses at a time. Big pension funds come along with literally billions of pounds to invest rather than millions, so they can make a big difference. New tenures like multi-generational living, so people are living together longer now. Most of you guys are getting priced out of the housing market before you even get there. So lots of people are living with their parents longer, but there's a thing about do we design houses to accommodate that, and then actually maybe later in life, the parents and the children swap places. And they get the parents get the smaller bit because that's all they need now. Once the children grow up and have children of their own, they need the bigger bit. So there's things like that. And there's also
this snazzily titled active elderly living that's coming along. That apparently now, if you're 55, you're active elderly. So look forward to that. And that is kind of like sheltered housing almost for the not quite elderly. So that is coming down the pipeline. So we're looking at a lot of that, and custom build, which is, so there's an interesting bell curve in housing that there's kind of the people who like just want the volume house builder stuff, they've lived in it before and they're just happy doing that. You've got the people who want the full grand designs experience, want to live in a caravan on a site and probably end up in divorce while they build their house. But in between that, there's a massive amount of people that would like something in between that, but they just don't know how to go about it. They don't want to self-build, but they don't want the sort of volume house builders thing. So we're working on a few schemes at the moment that have this thing called custom build, where you get together with a bunch of manufacturers who create a suite of components. So you can basically you can reconfigure your house around those components which are standardized, but you can use them in different ways. And then you can sort of have the house that you want. It's very complicated though, because you've got to get planning for something that you can't tell the planners what it's going to look like. So most of them kind of laugh at you. The first one we did took us sort of 5 years to get to the point where the planners were willing to accept that it might be something that they could look at. So that is currently being built in Bristol. So we're kind of all eyes on that and see what happens there. And then finally, we just bought a new office in London. So we're going to move into this in April next year. So we're furiously running about. This is an old plastic factory. So Parkasine was invented as a cheap alternative to ivory and tortoiseshell. So this factory was the first place that produced it in the country way back in the day. It's fantastic, long triple height space, loads of character, so we're going to fit it out. The guy at the front there is one of the partners who just realised he spent millions of quid on a crumbling building, but it's going to be loads of fun, but a lot of hard work before we get it. I think that's it. Okay. Thank you.